The birth of the people skills. Good morning. Before we talk about emotional intelligence, growth mindsets, or the psychology of habit building, we need to go back to 1936, back to a small, unassuming book that quietly did something to no one had really done before. It took the vague, mysterious idea of being good with people and turned it into a set of learnable, repeatable skills. And it didn't come from a psychologist, it didn't come from an academic. It came from a struggling farm boy from Missouri who once made his living teaching public speaking to businessmen in the basement of a young men's Christian association. The year is 1936. America is deep in the Great Depression. Jobs are scarce, competition is brutal, and for the first time at real scale, ordinary people are asking a very practical question. In a world this hard, what actually makes some people succeed while equally hardworking people struggle? Dale Carnegie had spent nearly 2 decades running courses on public speaking and human relationships. Testing his ideas live on thousands of ordinary working people, salesmen, clerks, managers, long before he ever wrote them down. How to win friends and influence people wasn't theory built in a laboratory. It was distilled from over a decade of trial and error in front of real audiences. Carnegie's central claim was almost radical in its simplicity. Technical skill and intelligence account for only a fraction of a person's success. The rest comes down to how well you understand and work with other people. His principles, still widely taught today, sound almost obvious once stated. Became genuinely interested in other people rather than trying to make them uninterested in you. Remember that a person's name is to them the most important sound in any language. Let others feel important and do it sincerely. Avoid direct criticism because it puts people on the defensive and really changes their behavior. Talk in them Talk in terms of the other person's interests, not just your own agenda. None of this was flattery for its own sake. Carnegie's deeper insight was that people are driven overwhelming by a need to feel significant, appreciated, and understandable, and that almost every interpersonal conflict traces back to that need going unmet. Sociologically, Carnegie's work reflects a specific historical shift: the move from an agrarian, close-knit community society to an urban industrial one, filled with strangers who had to cooperate, sell to each other, and work together without the built-in trust of small-town life. In that world, soft skills weren't a luxury, they were a survival mechanism for a new kind of social environment. Carnegie was essentially responding to the same shift Wilbur Schramm and Everett Goffman would later study formally. As society urbanized and social ties became looser and more transactional, people needed explicit tools for building trust with people they didn't already know. His work became one of the most mass market attempts to teach the skills earlier generations absorbed naturally from tight knit community life. Psychologically, Carnegie anticipated ideas that wouldn't be formally studied for decades. His insistence on sincere appreciation over criticism echoes what psychologists would later call positive reinforcement. His emphasis on listening and validating others' perspectives foreshadows what Carl Rogers would later develop into humanistic psychology's concept of unconditional positive regard. Most strikingly, Carnegie intuitively grasped something psychology would take decades to formalize: that human beings are not primarily rational actors weighing facts, but emotional beings who filter nearly everything through the lens of ego, self image, and the need to feel respected. He wasn't teaching manipulation, he was teaching people to work with human psychology rather than against it. But Carnegie's approach has drawn real, lasting criticism. Critics have long argued the book can tip into inauthenticity techniques for making people like you can shake into manipulation if practiced without genuine care for the other person. Used cynically, sincerity itself becomes a performance, which somewhat defeats Carnegie's own point. It's also been criticized as culturally and historically narrow, written by and largely for white American businessmen in the 1930s. Its advice doesn't always translate cleanly across cultures, with different norms around directness, hierarchy, and emotional expression, and it says very little about structural barriers. For someone facing discrimination or systemic disadvantage, be more likely is a much smaller level than Carnegie's confident tone implies. So why does 1936 self-help book still matter today? Because nearly every modern soft skills framework, active listening, emotional intelligence, personal branding, even the entire coaching and networking industry builds directly on the foundation Carnegie laid. His core insight that relationships and perceived trustworthiness drive success as much as raw competence is now backed by decades of organizational psychology research on likability, psychological safety, and social capital. Even LinkedIn culture, warm email openers, and people skills interview questions are, in a sense, Carnegie's principles running on modern infrastructure. The same underlying bet that how you make people feel is often more decisive than what you actually say. So we start here with the Depression era, cause taught in young men's Christian Association basement, because nearly everything that followed personal development exists in conversation with it, refining it, challenging it, or building on the foundation it first and down. But Carnegie's model, for all its insight, focused on entirely on how to influence and connect with other people. It said far less about something equally important, the relationship a person has with themselves, their own needs, their own growth, their own sense of purpose. That question belongs to our next chapter, Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs that would reshape how we think about human motivation itself. Thank you.